name is Cathy Arcuino, and I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor of Global Engagement here at UNCP. I'm super excited today that all of you are here to join our third Conversations Across Borders. And we also have another amazing international student to talk with us today. We're going to learn a lot, not only about his country and his culture, but also the experiences that he's had here in the United States. So without further ado, I would love to introduce one of my international kids from back in the day, Yazeed. Yay!
Thank you, Dr. Arcuino. My name is Yazeed Aldhwayan. I am currently a master's student in Valparaiso University in Indiana, studying analytics and modeling, which is basically data science. And currently, as part of my degree, I am interning here in UNCP with student affairs. So you might see me on campus, and please, if you do, say hi. I like talking to people. I am from Saudi Arabia, and I'm excited to talk about my country. I like my country, and I like talking about it whenever I get the chance.
Well, we love hearing about it. So fortunately, I've really gotten to know you over the past several years, but I know a lot of our listeners don't know you. So can you please tell us a little bit about where you're from in Saudi Arabia, about your family, just some things in general so we can know a little bit about your history?
So I am from the east coast of Saudi Arabia, and that is on what to most Americans might be the Persian Gulf, but to me and other Saudis, it's the Arabian Gulf. And it's one of the two coasts we have in Saudi Arabia. We also have the Red Sea on the west coast. So my city is called Dammam, and it's well known for the oil industry, which is what Saudi is famous for, of course, but that's where most of the oil business happens in the East Coast, where I'm from. I am one of five, which is, for my parents' generation, considered a big number, because most people now have mostly three. The older generations used to have bigger number of children, but not anymore. As part of the world becoming smaller, all of us are becoming similar and having smaller families. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, not a lot of people know much about Saudi Arabia, so several of the questions will talk about different things from recreational activities, also talking about leadership and some cultural and traditional activities that happen there. So anything that you want to share about that's going to be great for all of us. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, can you tell me a common pastime or hobby in Saudi Arabia that maybe you don't see frequently done or enjoyed here in the United States?
Yes. I like this question because I think some of the Saudi hobbies are what you think of. First of all, you would think of maybe falconry or people hunting with falcons. Raising camels is another thing that is expected about Saudi Arabia. And soccer is a big thing in Saudi Arabia, like the rest of the world. But a very a Saudi special hobby would be poetry, which I think might sound funny to Americans just because poetry here is usually associated with academics, and if someone reads it, they probably are in a university. But Saudi poetry and Arabic poetry in general is part of the people's culture. And for Arabs in general, not just for Saudi Arabia, throughout history, poetry has always been used instead of letters. So that's how people communicate. So if someone wanted to express that they're upset with someone else or that they care about someone else, they'll write them a poem, or they would ask someone who can write the poem to write it for them. And that throughout the years and in the current years turned into more of a hobby that people, that's how they express their feelings. So
Interesting.
Even on social media, that's what people post a lot of times is poems, or at least a couple of sentences of a bigger poem. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people know about Saudi Arabia. I'm not a poet personally because I really can't put the words together. I do enjoy it. My dad likes to write his own poetry. His poetry tends to be comedic in tone. My grandma, his mom, was a poet too, which is most of the time people think poetry is associated only with men, but even women. And but my grandma's poems were more about how she misses her kids who are living in different cities and she doesn't see them as much. So those are like very two common themes. Love is a big theme, even sometimes when people don't really have boyfriends or girlfriends to write about, but the fantasy of what they really want to happen. Yeah, so that's a little bit about the Saudis' hobbies, and poetry to be specific.
Well, it's interesting because I remember a lot of times when we had students from Latin America and other countries, everyone was always into soccer, you know, and they would come to the United States and everyone here is into football, and soccer wasn't as a big of a sport that was interesting. So I was curious, have you gotten into some of the American sports and some of the pastimes and hobbies here? And if so, what are some of those that are of interest to you?
I'm not a sports person, and specifically soccer. I do not like it because it's the only sport we watch in Saudi Arabia, but most of Saudi Arabia loves it. Even our national team has been to the World Cup. We were defeated and it was horrible. Please don't look up the scores, but participation, that's what we wanted to do. So personally, growing up with it made me dislike it. Coming to the US was very interesting because I did not only my master's in the US, I did my undergrad, and that was 10 years ago in Kansas. And my school, Pittsburgh State University, Kansas, were very big on soccer. They were a good team in Division II sports, and that was an introduction to what football is. I knew what American football is from TV and movies. Remember the Titans? But honestly, I never understood how it was played until I was in Kansas and people were teaching me the rules, and it's too complex. But I love the energy that goes with it. And more recently, I'm into basketball. That is my current favorite.
NBA in particular, right?
NBA in particular, yes. And being that I lived in Indiana, let's go Pacers. I don't know. Are they good? I really don't know. I enjoy the games themselves. I don't know about who's good or not. And actually, I know that some Saudis watch like the Super Bowl. So that can be big in Saudi Arabia, especially with all the music that happens in it. So that's another thing that people pay attention to. Again, with the internet making access to all of these easier. And there was a huge number of Saudi students in the US. And during that time, a lot of them were introduced to these sports that we don't really actively follow in Saudi Arabia. So that was a different thing that they explore. Again, soccer is still king, and that's what we all watch mostly.
Well, in further educating us more about Saudi Arabia, a lot of people, when they think of Saudi Arabia, and you even made this reference earlier, do think about oil, and with the oil equates to money and wealth. So I was curious, what do you think of this stereotype, and what would you like to share with our listeners today about other things that maybe we don't think about in relation to your country?
This is really funny because I think a lot of people don't know much about oil either. So some of the assumptions that I met when I first came to the States was that someone asked me if we drink oil, and I think they were genuine. Like, I don't think they were trying to be funny. Someone asked if I have access to oil or own a share in oil, which is not the case because oil is owned by the government, which is good because it's associated with how they pay for a lot of things like healthcare or education, since we get to go to college for free and we get treated in hospitals generally for free. Usually it's hard to get an appointment, but it's there like if you need it. So part of the assumptions about oil is that it's our only source of income, which to a certain extent, yes, that's our biggest export, but Saudi Arabia also exports flowers. You didn't think that's
No, I did
I know.
not.
Yeah. We recently, I found out recently that we export shrimp, which also
I
surprised me. Yeah.
love.
So these are some when it's for the business side about oil, but recently in recent years there've been a big change in Saudi Arabia culturally and business wise because they realize there are more business opportunities that we should focus on, and there's been a big push to be competing with cities like Dubai in the area, which does a lot of business, and trying to go into the internet market. Amazon have expanded their operation into the area too, based on all the demand that
Hmm.
comes from Saudi Arabia and the neighboring country.
Hmm. You made an interesting point earlier that something that's very different in Saudi Arabia than in the United States is about free education. So I was wondering, especially we have some college students that are listening. Can you explain a little bit more about how that works in regards to getting free education? Is it by the neighborhood you live in? How do you get to choose what school? Is there a waiting list? Anything that you can share with that, because that's just a very different concept from what we have here.
Yes. So free education, the normal thing is your schooling from kindergarten to your high school years, 12 years of school. That is, you're guaranteed through government schools that would be with no charge. But at the same time, there are other schools that are private and you would pay for them. Some of them are better than government schools and some of them are not. And when it comes to the government school, that's based on your location and where you're living. That's how you end up in which school. So you might end up in a good school just because your neighborhood is good, or you might end up in a not good school. And that's when sometimes the parents choose to send their kids to a private school. And it used to be when I was growing up that if you wanted your kids to learn English early on, you'd send them to
Mhm.
a private school. And that's something that my parents um, paid for because they wanted me to learn English. But by the time my siblings were about to start studying, English started to be taught from a younger age. So really, that wasn't as important at the time. Now for college, um, it's based on who gets accepted. So they have room for a certain number of people every year, and if you get accepted, you get to study for free. If not, um, then you can go to one of the private colleges, which most of the time cost money. And in variation, some are as expensive as US colleges and some um, are not. But generally it's if you put any kind of effort, you're guaranteed some sort of position in one of the government universities. And
Mhm.
that is not necessarily your favorite or your top choice of a major,
Mhm.
but um, it's free.
Yeah.
And it's and it's not always not all of them are, again, are the best. Some are good universities, some are good enough for you to find a job, especially if you're aiming for a government job, which is what the majority of Saudis are working in. Although recently there's been a bigger intake in private companies of people. Yeah, and when it comes to healthcare, just because I mentioned that earlier, um, so we have private hospitals, but the government hospitals are generally for free. The only disadvantage is the waiting list for you to get a surgery done or something like that would be long, and for you to find an appointment. If you have an emergency, you would just straight up go to a government hospital and you'll be treated with no charge, which is actually something that surprised me about the US because
Mhm.
when I first got here, I remember going to an ER for a twisted ankle, which I learned was not something I should do. I think, yeah, I ended up paying out of pocket for that, and that wasn't good. Uh, but I learned an important lesson. Um,
Mhm.
so that's, I guess, a culture shock, you could call it.
Mhm. Well, I think what would also be interesting for others to know is actually why did you choose to come to the United States for actually both of your degrees when there are options that you could have gone to a government school?
Well, I actually, since a young age, I grew up watching American TV and movies and cartoons and all of that got me really excited about coming to the US. It's the dream. And what I really wanted, I did not want to go to New York City or California where you see it in movies. I wanted, whenever it's the sitcom family, I wanted these houses. I wanted that kind of life. I wanted to experience that. And it's been in my mind as a goal to achieve, because going there would be an adventure by itself. And it's happened. There was an opportunity to get scholarships from the government for me to go for my undergrad, which a lot of Saudis did. And I ended up in one of these scholarships, and I ended up in Kansas. And that was perfect because I ended up living in a house that was very reminiscent of these houses I see in family sitcoms. Which, in a neighborhood that looked like what it would look in a TV show. And while it was a small town and nowhere in Kansas, so nobody knew what that town was, it's called Pittsburgh, but it's not the real Pittsburgh. That still met what I really wanted to see about the US. And that was for my undergrad. So after I graduated and I needed to study my master's, I thought about going to different countries, but considering the type of degree I wanted, which is data analytics, the US was by far had more options. And I have to admit, I love the US. So it was easier to convince myself to do that. And I specifically wanted somewhere in the north, and that's how I ended up in Indiana, close to Chicago, because I wanted somewhere with a different environment than what I'm used to in Saudi Arabia. I wanted something cold, and that's what I got there. Lots of snow. I regret that now, but it was a new experience. I've never felt such cold, and I did not realize it could be so painful. But I learned my lesson, and I'm glad I did that, because this allowed me the opportunity to come here in the South, which was a complete different environment than what you have in Indiana. And I never thought that the same country would be that different in two different locations. So,
yeah, it's really interesting, the different states and the different regions of the United States, how much there is to see, how the weather changes, the accents, the cultures, the food. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. So there are some misconceptions that foreigners may have about Saudi Arabia. And I was just wondering, especially when people are talking to you, wherever you've worked, also where you've studied, what are some of those misconceptions that you think people have, and what are some things that you would like to teach us today?
I think when people think of Saudi Arabia, they first of all think we're all very rich, and they're not wrong. I'm kidding. We have a variety of people. We do have poverty, sadly, and we do have a middle class, and we do have the ultra rich, and we have levels of rich too. So it's not every rich person is driving a Maserati and wearing a Rolex. Some people who are in better situations than in the US, I have to admit, I think, and this is not based on any studies I've read, this is just my observation, is that our middle class is a little bit higher than what is considered middle class in the US, which is a blessing. I have to admit, seeing different areas of the US have given me that perspective that we are blessed by this oil that gave us the money. But we do sadly have people who are not living in the best situations. There are government support that is available for them, but there's always more room to grow and for us to help people more. Another thing that people talk about usually about Saudi Arabia is religion. And while most people, if not all of them, would consider themselves Muslims, that really doesn't mean they're all the most Muslim you can be. And I think one thing, when I first came to the US, people would be surprised if I didn't do something that they expected a Muslim to do, or if I did something they didn't know. And you have to think of it that people might, like what you see with, for example, Christians, where someone is really Christian and they would go to every sermon and every Sunday they are at church, and you have some other Christians who maybe miss a couple, right? And the same thing for Muslims. You have people who are very dedicated to their religion, and you have people who maybe are not the best at following the rules, but they try. And you have people who maybe aren't completely are not interested, but it's just the environment they were born into it. And with religion, that leads to the final thing that people talk about mostly, which is women in Saudi Arabia and how they cover their faces or they don't drive, which changed recently. Um, Now women in Saudi can drive. It took a long time, but finally they can. And when it comes to women, it's very tricky to talk about it just because, first of all, I'm a man, so my perspective will always be a little different than a woman who actually lived in Saudi Arabia. But based on what I know about my family, especially, and the women I've worked with, because I did work in Saudi Arabia for a while, and it's not always oppressive. Sure, I can't deny that women go through oppression, but from what I've noticed is that it's similar to the issues that women face in the US too, based on what I've read and based on the people I talk to, because this comes up especially when I get close to people and we start talking about different cultures, the oppression that women go through is very similar. It's just dressed differently. And not every woman in Saudi Arabia covers her face. For example, my mom does cover her face, and that's actually by her choice. But she's also from an older generation, so it might have been ingrained in her from a younger age. While my sister doesn't. She still wears a hijab. And it's true when women are outside walking around Saudi and out in the streets, they had to wear modest clothing. It used to be more strict than what it is now, but it's slowly changing. And I think in general, people tend to think it's harsher than it actually is. The good news is, other than that, we're slowly improving, is now Saudi takes tourists, not currently because COVID is happening, but now we have tourist visas. And I think if someone would be able to come to Saudi, they would be surprised that it's nicer than you might have heard and in the news. So I encourage people to come visit. We have delicious food.
Yes. Well, one of the things that was always interesting to me is when international students would tell me some of the questions that Americans would ask them. So one of the funniest ones I remember is that some of the Brazilian students came up to me and they're like, Dr. Cathy Lee, Americans asked us if we lived in the jungle, do we have electricity, things of that sort being in Brazil. And I just always thought that that was so comical that a lot of our international kids would get these really funny questions to me, or funny questions to them that I just thought were pretty interesting, and also helped me recognize that there are a lot of things that people don't know. So in talking about Saudi Arabia, and you referenced this a couple of times, I do think that a lot of people think that all of Saudi Arabia is desert, like what you said, and that maybe everybody has pet camels or maybe something like that. So can you talk a little bit about the climate, but most importantly, I want to say maybe the landscape of Saudi Arabia differing from east to west, and also with animal life there aren't just like random animals running around all over the place, but some things like that that might be interesting for others to hear about today.
Yeah, you mentioning these questions actually reminds me of people asking me, again, genuinely, not trying to be mean, if we ride camel and if we live in the desert, which true, like I'm originally from a village in the desert, so I can't deny that. Although now I live on the coast. But no, we don't ride camel as much unless for fun, just because now we have cars. So what about also riding a camel isn't as cool as riding a horse. So more people actually ride horses, again, for fun, not for actual transportation, just because riding a horse is more fun than riding a camel. So that does happen. When it comes to the geography of Saudi Arabia, we actually are, well, a big chunk of it is desert. The south of Saudi Arabia is very green because we have mountains there, and it's a great summer holiday location because the weather there is wonderful. Where I live in the East Coast is very humid. I've heard about the North Carolina humidity, so I haven't experienced it yet, so I can't tell you if Saudi would be worse. But it's to the point, to the point that when you step outside, it's like you jumped in a pool. That's how bad the humidity gets there. Which is funny because you would think, oh, desert, shouldn't it be dry? Now, the center of Saudi Arabia, that is very dry. Although surprisingly, we get rains sometimes. And one time the rain was so bad, like the streets were so flooded that the cars were getting moved. And of course, we didn't have the infrastructure to handle the rain because, again, we're in a desert. So we didn't expect to get rain. The north of Saudi Arabia for the past maybe 5 years have been getting snow, which I recently saw this year that people were talking about on the internet that they're surprised. Oh, what? Saudi Arabia has snow, and yeah, for the past 5 years or so, we've been getting snow only in the north of Saudi Arabia, not all of Saudi Arabia. Yet, we one thing I did not mention when I mentioned the flowers that we produce, we also produce dates. That happens in our dry climate. So that's part of the geography. Yeah.
So one of the things that you and I have talked about on different occasions, but just in general, I know is one of your interests is leadership. And I think that coming from Saudi Arabia, and then especially this is the second time that you've studied in the United States, although I know you visited the United States a few other times, you know, these have been very interesting times over the past several years, just in regards to different leadership, you know, in Saudi Arabia, in the United States, across the world in general. And so I'm curious today if you could talk to me a little bit about what you think a leader is, but also in that, how do you think that leadership is portrayed, or also how leadership is implemented in Saudi Arabia? And with the time you spent in the United States, do you view that differently, or do you have any sort of opinions on to seeing some similarities, yet some of the differences that are in leadership across both countries?
When it comes to leadership, especially in Saudi Arabia, like our culture is what they call heavy in context, and everything you do carries a meaning with it. So you have to be really careful in how you portray yourself. So if you are in a position of leading people or wanting to lead people, everything you say really matters. And I found that when I came here to the South, I noticed how respectful people and people really care about being respected and showing respect to others. It's not just by saying ma'am and sir, it's in how they talk to everybody and how they carry themselves. And that's very similar to how Saudi Arabia is, which is different from what I saw in Kansas in the Midwest. I'm not saying that the Kansas did not care about respecting others, but they were more straightforward in how they communicated with people or asked them for things, while I noticed here people really care about coming off respectful and not offending someone while still maintaining their position of leadership. And that is very similar to how Saudi Arabia is. It's respect is very important, and especially when it comes to someone who's older than you would put them, you have to show them more respect and be very tactful in how you ask them for anything and how you direct them, and not really give them an order. Even though you are in a position to order them around, but that's still a very big part of what Saudi culture is. And a lot of families in Saudi Arabia are part of bigger tribes, and these tribes would always have a leader to that tribe who's usually senior by age, and that position usually is inherited because the father was a leader and then the son followed in his footsteps. But again, they're usually older in age. And again, the same thing is respect and leadership comes with seniority. So it's very different from the US in the sense that you can't be as direct as you wish. I like the directness of the US sometimes because it makes life easier. It gets business done quicker. But at the same time, I really like how much we value the person, which I think that's something in one of the other conversations with Alali from Paraguay, she was talking about how you have to take care of the people. You have to really talk to the people and get to know them. Show them respect, show them that you care. And that is part of Saudi culture because people would not really respect you or talk to you if you don't respect them. And they would not follow what you lead, even if they have to. You have to demonstrate to them that you care about them. You are part of the family. You are part of this tribe, and you are showing them respect.
So do you find now that since you understand what it's like in Saudi Arabia and see those differences and similarities in leadership also to the United States, how have you handled code switching or also maneuvering, right? In the United States as a leader in the different roles you've been in, also when you are working in Saudi Arabia and that, because you've already been influenced and have experiences here, but also know you're in the culture there. So I think that one of the interesting things with getting to know you better over the last several years is because you've taken, the best of both worlds, but at the same time recognizing that it's not going to always be received in certain environments. So can you talk a little bit about that cross-cultural exchange in leadership?
Yes. I think when I first came to the US, I was so excited to be away from the traditions of Saudi Arabia. I was like, yes, this is a free country and I can be as free as I want. Who cares about this context? I could just be direct with people. And I like that. But I learned working in Saudi Arabia that sometimes tact is nice. And I found that a balance is needed. And I think it serves me well now in that generally I've had a good experience whenever I meet people because respect goes a long way. Either you are in a direct society or you are in a more context heavy. Nobody is going to be mad at you for being polite and being respectful, but it's good to be able to switch to a more direct approach. I remember one time while I was working in Saudi, I did the American thing of just expressing how I felt in an email to a supervisor. And someone, like my coworker, told me, "Oh, I can't believe you just said that." And I said, "What?" I read it. There's no disrespect in my email, but it wasn't. I did not include any of the. I was direct, basically, where I should have expressed myself in a more tactful way. The supervisor was more of a, while he's Saudi, he was married to an American woman, so he's kind of used to the directness, so it flew okay, but it was eye-opening to know that maybe I should watch my approach because being respectful would never hurt me as much as maybe being direct with the wrong person. So it is interesting, and I think it's more complex than we know, but.
Well, are there any idioms, proverbs, or any kind of saying that Saudi elders share with young people in regards to leadership or just in general about life?
Like I said about poetry being a big thing in Saudi Arabia, the same thing for idioms and saying, and a lot of them come from each other. So it would be a poem, and part of it would be taken as a proverb later. And so we love sayings. We love talking in idioms and slogans and all of that. So one of my favorites is, I would say in Arabic, then I'll translate it, no worries, is لسانك حصانك إن سنت حصانك إن خنت خانك, which
the transcriber gets that. Go ahead.
Which basically says that your tongue is like a horse that you take care of. If you treat it well, it will treat you well. And if you treat it badly, it'll treat you badly and like knock you over its back. And it basically means you just have to, going back to the same thing I was talking about earlier, respect is if you say the wrong thing, if you don't use your words correctly, that will harm you because that's what it's part of. It could also go beyond your words and what you say using your tongue. It's also what you do. It's like whatever you do reflects who you are. And it's the same as treat people as you want to be treated. And at the same time, the word Sonic comes with two meanings, one being the horse and the other means a fortress. So again, your words would really protect you. If you are showing people good, that good would always protect you from harm, because nobody's really going to hurt you if you're always good to them.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Well, one other thing that I wanted to make sure that was asked is that I was curious, with the time you spent in the States, how do you feel that that has changed your outlook and your view, not only on yourself, but of the world?
Again, like I said about the leadership, when I first came to the States, my mentality was I just want everything American, and I want to let go of all my Saudi traditions because it really didn't matter. This is the way I want it to be. But the more time I spent here, I realized we are so similar. We might dress a little different. We might eat different food, speak a different language, but in the end, we are all the same people. And I know this is kind of cheesy to say, but we are all human, and we all care about our families. We used to have a misconception in Saudi that Americans don't really care about their families. It's all about me, me, me. And once your kid is 18, you kick them out the door and you never talk to them again or something. And that kids would put their parents at like nursing homes because they don't love them. And this is shocking to us Saudis because we're all about family. But the more I meet Americans, I'm realizing, first of all, there are too many different kinds of Americans. Some who really are part of, like, care about their families, and just like Saudis, because not every Saudi likes their family either. And we have more similarities than differences. And that led me to actually appreciate more of my Saudi traditions too, and realizing there's room for us to be different yet the same.
Well, I wanted to let everybody know that about 11 years ago, I was so fortunate enough to meet Yazeed. Earlier in my career, I was an associate director at Pittsburgh, Kansas, the institution he was referring to. And Yazeed was one of my international kids. All of those kids that were there with me, we were together all the time. I not only did I teach them many things, but most importantly, they taught me so much. And I could never imagine my life without them. Yazeed has been such a special part of my family's life, and actually he's like a little brother to me. So sweetheart, I just want to tell you, I am so proud of you, because 11 years ago when you got off of the plane from Saudi Arabia, I was there to welcome you during orientation, and just throughout the years to see you now, how amazing your language is, how able you are to just switch between different cultures. But most importantly, you've done so much to help educate so many people, not only in the Midwest, but also here in North Carolina. So just know that you will always have my love and support, and you make me so proud. And I was just so excited to have this opportunity to talk to you today, because I want other people to know your awesomeness, especially since you're here at UNCP. So would you like to close with anything else before we stop?
I would like to say, first of all, love you too. And I wouldn't be able to be here without actually your support and your leadership, because having a good mentor really is what pushed me to be more able to contribute, able to see, like, sure, I can be some sort of leader. If she believes in me, I could believe in myself, which is really what made me be able to do this, and given me the opportunity like this to talk about Saudi Arabia. And I just want to say, like what Vali said in the previous conversation, cross-border, is this is the opinion of just one Saudi, and we are as diverse as the US in gender and thought and race and everything. So there is more to Saudi Arabia than what I just expressed. And I hope, if you are intrigued by this, to and you see me, come and talk to me again. Or send me your questions if you can find me since I'm part of UNCP. Hopefully, like, you can find my contact information and send me a question. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about Saudi Arabia or anything. Honestly, I like to talk. If you couldn't tell by this conversation, yeah, and I'm hoping that you learned something from this and have a good year.
Well, thank you so very much. And everybody, thank you for listening. We look forward to hopefully in the future having more conversations across borders. So thank you so much. Bye-bye.